Their SOS reached Earth, and the Deathworlders answered. The stars were quiet, but silence in space was never a sign of peace. On the planet of Serath, a proud and gentle civilization lived under twin suns. They were known across nearby systems as traders, artists, and builders, not as warriors. For centuries, they believed that reason and diplomacy could solve every conflict. But that belief was shattered when the Empire arrived. The Empire came like a storm. Its warships blotted out the skies, casting shadows over cities that once sparkled with light. Towers of glass and steel crumbled under orbital bombardment. The air filled with the smell of burning metal and stone, and the screams of people who had never imagined war. The Serath fleets were weak, their weapons outdated, their crews untrained. They fought with courage, but courage meant little against an enemy bred for conquest. One by one, their defense ships were reduced to dust, leaving only debris drifting in the void. Inside the High Council chamber, panic filled the air. Leaders argued, voices breaking with fear. Some demanded surrender, believing mercy could be bought. Others insisted on fighting until the last breath, though everyone knew the outcome was already written. In the middle of this chaos, a single idea surfaced, a desperate gamble. Buried deep beneath the council hall was an ancient communication array, built long ago by forgotten explorers. Its signal was designed to travel far, farther than the Serath could ever dream of going themselves. It had never been used. No one even knew if it still worked, but in their final hour, it was their only hope. Technicians rushed to the dark chamber, brushing centuries of dust from the controls. The machine groaned as it powered on, old circuits struggling to wake. They encoded a message, short, pleading, raw with desperation. It was not in their language alone. It was a universal distress signal, designed for any who might listen across the endless void. Their words were simple: "We are under attack. Our world is dying. If anyone can hear this, please help us." The council chamber fell silent as the signal was launched into the dark sea of stars. They all knew the truth. Space was vast. Light itself took years to cross the gulf between stars. By the time anyone heard them, if anyone did, Serath would likely be ash and ruin. Still, it was better to scream into the night than to die in silence. Above the planet, the war raged on. Empire soldiers descended on wings of fire, storming cities, dragging survivors in chains. Families huddled in broken shelters, waiting for the end. The signal raced outward beyond their system, past wandering comets and ancient asteroids, past stars that had burned long before Serath was born. It traveled into unknown territory, carrying with it the last cry of a dying people. And then, against all odds, it reached a small blue planet orbiting a yellow sun. On Earth, deep in a monitoring station buried beneath mountains, an operator froze as his screen lit up with strange symbols. At first he thought it was a glitch, noise from a passing pulsar or the chatter of cosmic radiation. But as the computers decoded it, his heart began to pound. It was no accident. It was a voice from another world. He read the words aloud, his voice trembling. Others gathered around him, their faces pale with shock. The message was simple, but behind its simplicity lay terror, despair, and a plea that could not be ignored. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now at last they knew the answer, and the answer came with a scream for help. The message was rushed up the chain of command, across governments, through hidden military channels, to the highest offices of Earth. Leaders stared at the recording in silence. Scientists confirmed it was genuine. Astronomers traced the signal's origin, pointing to a system far from Earth but not unreachable. The room grew heavy with the weight of choice. For hours, debates raged. Some argued that it was not their fight, that humanity should stay silent, safe, and hidden. Others countered that ignoring the cry of a dying world would make humanity no better than the monsters who destroyed it. Yet underneath all the fear and hesitation was something else, something older than politics, something human. Humanity had grown on a world of storms, earthquakes, predators, and endless struggle. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars of fire and steel. They were children of a death world, forged by hardship, sharpened by pain. To them, struggle was not strange. It was the air they breathed. And now, somewhere out there, another world was calling for help. In the end, the decision was made not with words, but with silence and resolve. The generals stood, the admirals nodded, and orders were given. Earth would answer. The operator who first heard the message returned to his station. On his screen, the alien distress call still looped, repeating over and over into the void. He stared at it for a long moment, then whispered to no one in particular. "You are not alone anymore." Across the blackness of space, the Serath did not know if their message had found a listener. Their cities burned, their fleets fell, their hope faded, but far away on a small blue planet something stirred. Humanity had heard the call, and humanity was already preparing to move. The SOS had been answered. The message from Serath played again in the silent conference hall. Leaders of Earth sat around a long table, their faces grim, eyes fixed on the flickering screen. The alien words had been translated into every human language, and still, they carried the same weight: fear, pain, and a desperate plea. Outside the hall, the world continued its daily rhythm, unaware that something extraordinary had happened. Humanity was no longer alone. The generals were the first to speak. They saw the message as both an opportunity and a danger. If one alien world existed, more would surely follow. If one empire of conquest existed, others could too. Earth's survival had always depended on being ready for the unknown. This was not just a cry for help, it was a warning. Humanity had to prepare, but the politicians hesitated. Some argued that humanity had only just begun to find peace after centuries of war on Earth. Was it wise to leap into another conflict, one light years away, against an enemy they had never seen? "We cannot fight a war that is not ours," one leader said. "We cannot risk everything for strangers." The room murmured in agreement, but not all. A scientist stood up, his voice shaking with urgency. "If we do nothing, then we prove ourselves as cold as the ones who destroy them. This is not only about their survival, it is about what kind of species we choose to be. Do we turn away or do we answer?" His words hung in the air like a challenge. Around the world, secret debates echoed the same conflict. Military strategists dusted off old plans for deep space missions. Engineers reviewed blueprints of ships meant for exploration but now considered for war. In hidden laboratories, AI networks simulated battles against unknown enemies, calculating odds and possibilities. But outside the halls of power, ordinary people learned of the message too. Leaks spread through whispers, and soon stories filled news channels, forums, and conversations. Humanity argued not just in conference rooms, but in streets and homes. And slowly, something began to grow, a sense of unity that had been missing for centuries. Earth had always been divided by nations, borders, and languages. But now, for the first time, the enemy was not another human. The enemy was out there in the stars, and beyond the fear, beyond the danger, people felt a strange pride. Humanity had been called. Someone somewhere believed they were strong enough to help. The military fleets were prepared in silence. Massive carriers were brought out of dry docks, armed with weapons that had never been tested in real battle. Railguns capable of tearing holes through mountains, nuclear warheads refined into star killers, drones that could swarm like locusts, all loaded onto ships painted with the flags of Earth. The fleets were no longer divided by country. This was not the American fleet, the Russian fleet, or the Chinese fleet. It was the United Earth Fleet, something no one had thought possible until that moment. The crews were chosen carefully. Men and women who had grown up on the harshest environments Earth had to offer. Desert soldiers who knew heat, mountain climbers who knew thin air, deep-sea divers who had tasted crushing pressure. Humanity had always survived against impossible odds. Now those same instincts would be carried to the stars. Still, doubts lingered. What if this was a trap? What if the signal was bait, designed to draw Earth into a war they could not win? What if they revealed themselves too soon and other empires came hunting? These questions haunted the leaders, but in the end, the answer was always the same. Humanity had never been safe. Their entire history was proof that safety was an illusion. And if survival meant standing up against predators, then humans had already been doing it for thousands of years. The first ships lifted quietly from their bases. To the world, they were simply exploration missions, another step into the age of space travel. But those who watched closely saw the truth. These ships were armed like no explorers had ever been. They carried soldiers hardened by history, scientists ready to adapt, and commanders who had fought wars across continents. As the fleet left orbit, Earth watched in silence. Families waved at the skies, not knowing if their sons and daughters would return. Leaders gave speeches about peace and duty, but underneath their words was a steel promise. Humanity would not ignore the cry of a dying world. Far across the stars, on the ruined planet of Serath, survivors hid in caves and burned-out buildings. They thought their signal had vanished into emptiness. They thought no one had heard. But on the edge of their sensors, faint readings appeared, shapes moving fast, larger than anything they had ever seen before. They whispered in fear. Was it another Empire ship? Was it the end at last? The survivors gathered at the mouth of a shattered temple, staring at the night sky. Above them, distant flashes marked the movement of ships. And then, one of the symbols translated across their systems, old universal code flickering to life. United Earth Fleet, responding to your call. For a moment, the survivors could not breathe. They looked at one another, disbelief mixing with hope. A second message followed, short and clear, in a voice that carried calm strength. We heard you. You are not alone. The Serath had cried into the dark, and against all odds, humanity had answered. The Serath survivors gathered in silence, staring at the skies above their broken world. They had expected more flames, more ships of the Empire, more chains and fire raining from orbit. But what they saw instead was something different, something unfamiliar. Dark silhouettes hung against the stars, too large, too sharp, too organized to belong to their enemy. The ruins of the city reflected their lights like ghostly lanterns. For the first time in many days, the survivors felt something strange in their chests, something that felt like hope. Inside the lead human ship, the UES Dauntless, Admiral Marcus Hale stood before the observation deck. His crew worked quietly, disciplined, but every face betrayed the same thought. This was history. They were about to make contact with an alien world, not as explorers, not as traders, but as defenders answering a desperate call. He gave the order to open a channel. The Serath systems, half destroyed by bombardment, flickered to life with a signal. A voice came through, steady and calm. This is Admiral Hale of the United Earth Fleet. We received your message. We are here to help. The Serath leaders, huddled in an underground chamber, froze as the translation appeared before them. A stranger's voice, not filled with threats, not demanding surrender, but offering aid. For a long moment, no one moved. They had been lied to before, tricked with false promises. Was this another deception? Still, their desperation was greater than their fear. One counselor spoke into the comm, her voice trembling. If you are truly here to help, then we beg you, save our people. The human admiral did not hesitate. Then we stand with you. Within hours, dropships descended through the smoky skies. The Serath survivors braced themselves, uncertain what monsters might emerge. But when the hatches opened, the figures that stepped out were unlike anything they had seen. Tall, broad, eyes sharp and steady, wearing heavy armor that gleamed in the firelight. Humans moved with confidence, scanning ruins, setting up defensive lines, securing perimeters with weapons that hummed with restrained power. They looked like warriors from myths, not diplomats or merchants, the Serath whispered among themselves. The word passed quickly. Deathworlders. Every scholar knew the stories, rumors of worlds so harsh that only the strongest, most brutal life could survive there. Such places were rare, and the creatures that grew upon them were feared across the stars. Yet now these very beings had come not as conquerors, but as allies. A Serath child peeked out from behind rubble, wide-eyed, staring at a human soldier adjusting his rifle. The soldier noticed, then knelt down, offering the child a ration pack. The child hesitated, then reached forward, clutching the gift with trembling hands. In that moment, the whispers grew louder. These warriors had hearts. They were not like the Empire. As the days passed, humans worked beside the Serath. Engineers repaired broken comm arrays. Medics tended to the wounded with steady hands. Soldiers trained Serath volunteers, teaching them discipline, teaching them how to fight back. What shocked the Serath most was not just the strength of humanity, but their fearlessness. Where Serath soldiers flinched at the sound of approaching ships, humans only smiled grimly, eager for a challenge. Admiral Hale met privately with the Serath High Council in the ruins of their former capital. The counselors asked the question that had haunted them since the humans' arrival. Why? Why had Earth risked so much, traveled so far, for a species they did not know? The Admiral's answer was simple. Because you called. And because that is what we do. Humanity has always answered when others cried out. We were forged in hardship. We do not run from it. The counselors exchanged glances. They had never heard such words before. Not from any other world, not from any other species. The Serath realized then that humanity was not just another civilization. They were something else entirely. But hope was fragile. The Empire had not left. Their fleets regrouped beyond the edge of the system, gathering strength. Scouts reported massive warships preparing to return, armed with enough firepower to shatter what remained of Serath. Humanity's arrival had bought time, but time was running out. In the human command center, holographic displays lit up with enemy movements. The officers studied the patterns, calm but focused. Where others saw doom, the humans saw a puzzle to solve, an enemy to defeat. "They think we are weak," one captain said with a grin. "Let's show them what a Deathworlder fleet can do." The Serath, listening in silence, felt shivers. They had seen humans train, fight, and plan, but hearing them prepare for war was like listening to a storm gather strength. There was no fear in their voices, only certainty. On the eve of the coming battle, Serath survivors gathered in the broken streets, watching the human fleet rise into the skies. The ships glowed with power, engines roaring, leaving trails of fire behind them. Children pointed upward, their eyes wide with awe. For the first time since the invasion began, the Serath people whispered words they had almost forgotten. "Maybe we will survive." And far above, in the dark void where the Empire waited, the humans prepared their weapons. They were not invaders. They were not saviors seeking praise. They were warriors answering a call. The Serath had asked for help, and the Deathworlders had arrived. The first encounter was over. The true war was about to begin. The Serath sky trembled as the Empire returned. Their warships slid into orbit like black knives, blotting out the stars. The survivors on the ground felt despair wash over them again. They had seen this sight before. Ships so vast, so merciless, that no resistance had survived. But this time something was different. Humanity stood ready. On the bridge of the UES Dauntless, Admiral Marcus Hale studied the tactical display. Red markers filled the holographic map, showing the Empire's fleet advancing. Dozens of battleships, carriers, and swarms of fighters closed in. A lesser species might have called it hopeless. But Hale's face was calm, his voice steady. "All ships," he ordered, "hold formation. We fight on our terms." The United Earth fleet spread out across orbit, their hulls reflecting the pale light of the suns. Railguns were armed, missiles primed, and drone swarms released from bays like clouds of steel insects. Human warships did not shine with elegance like the fleets of other civilizations. They were brutal, angular, and scarred from tests in Earth's harshest conditions. But they were built to survive, and to kill. The Serath Council, watching through the feed provided by the humans, whispered in awe. "They do not hesitate," one elder murmured. "They do not fear." Another added, "They look at the enemy as if it is already defeated." The Empire fired first. From their carriers, beams of searing energy ripped through the void, striking the humans' front line. Shields shimmered, hulls shook, alarms rang, but the ships held. Then, with a command as calm as a whisper, Admiral Hale gave the order, "Return fire." The void lit up like a second sun. Nuclear warheads streaked across the darkness, leaving trails of fire. Railguns thundered, their rounds traveling faster than sound could exist. Drones weaved through enemy formations, ripping into the Empire's fighters. Human weapons were not elegant, they were devastating. Where the Empire had expected the usual slow resistance of weaker species, they found themselves drowning in relentless, calculated violence. The first enemy cruiser vanished in a flash as a human missile tore through its reactor. A cheer erupted from the crew of the Dauntless. The Serath survivors watching from below gasped as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. The invincible Empire was bleeding. The Empire, enraged, unleashed its full might. Carriers vomited waves of fighters. Destroyers launched storms of plasma, and battleships closed in to crush the smaller human fleet. But humans did not retreat. They adapted. Commands flew between ships, adjustments made in seconds. Where the Empire fought with brute strength, humans fought with cunning. They lured enemy ships into crossfire traps, used drones to bait carriers into exposing their flanks, and sacrificed single-use frigates to cripple massive destroyers. Every loss was calculated, every risk deliberate. In the ruined cities below, Serath civilians gathered in the open, staring at the sky glowing with streaks of fire. The heavens roared with explosions like a storm of gods. Parents held their children close, whispering prayers not to their own gods but to the strangers who had come from across the stars. Inside the battle, fear had no place. A human captain laughed as his ship dodged incoming fire by mere meters. "They think they can scare us," he said, grinning as his crew fired another railgun salvo. Another pilot whispered into her comm, "Let's show them how Deathworlders dance," before diving her fighter straight through enemy fire, releasing torpedoes that shredded an enemy carrier. Hours passed, though for those fighting, time felt like seconds stretched into eternity. Both fleets suffered. Human ships burned, hulls torn open, lives lost. But for every human ship destroyed, 3 enemy vessels fell. The Empire had never faced such resistance. Their commanders, arrogant and overconfident, began to falter. For the first time in centuries, they doubted their own strength. At the height of the battle, when the Empire's largest battleship advanced toward Serath itself, Admiral Hale gave the order that would be remembered for centuries. "Bring the Sunbreaker online." From the belly of the Dauntless, a weapon emerged, an experimental rail cannon designed to hurl a tungsten rod at near light speed. The crew held their breath as the weapon charged, the energy humming like thunder. The Serath survivors watching through the feed could only stare. "Fire," Hale commanded. The tungsten slug ripped through space faster than any eye could follow. It struck the Empire battleship with such force that the vessel split apart in silence, exploding into burning fragments that lit the void like fireworks. The shockwave scattered the enemy fleet. For the first time, the Empire retreated. The Serath streets erupted with cries of joy. Survivors hugged one another, tears running down faces long hardened by fear. Children shouted the word they had heard whispered again and again: humans. The invincible enemy was broken, and it was humanity who had done it. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Hale gave no smile, no cheer. His voice was steady as if he had expected nothing else. "Maintain pursuit. Drive them out of this system." The battle was not over. Humanity knew it. But for the Serath, this day would forever be remembered as the moment hope returned. The invaders had been beaten back not by gods, not by ancient legends, but by humans, children of a death world who refused to bow. As the fires of battle cooled in orbit, and the wreckage of Empire ships drifted silently in space, the Serath people whispered a new truth among themselves. Perhaps survival was not impossible after all. Perhaps with these strange, fierce allies they could rise again. But the humans, already preparing for the next fight, knew what came next. This was only the beginning. The wreckage of the battle drifted silently in orbit. Broken pieces of the Empire's once proud fleet glowed like dying embers, scattered across the void. The Serath stood beneath their ruined skies, staring upward at the strange and terrible beauty of it. For so long they had only known despair. For so long the shadow of the Empire had meant death. But now that shadow had been burned away by fire, and the fire belonged to humanity. In the halls of the surviving council, the air was heavy with disbelief. Reports poured in from across the planet. Empire forces fleeing, human soldiers securing cities, wounded being treated with strange but effective medicines. The Serath leaders sat in silence, their minds struggling to accept what had happened. A species they had never known, born on a distant world, had come across the stars to fight for them. Not for wealth, not for conquest, but simply because they had called. Admiral Hale entered the chamber, his uniform scorched from battle, his face calm but stern. The Serath counselors rose as he spoke. "The enemy is broken but not gone. They will regroup. They will return. But you are not alone anymore. Earth will stand with you." One elder stepped forward, her voice trembling. Why would you risk so much for us? "We have nothing to offer. We are weak. Our world is in ashes. Why would Deathworlders bleed for strangers?" Hale's answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of all humanity's history. "Because we know what it means to suffer. Because we know what it means to fight against odds that cannot be won. And because when you called, we heard you. That was enough." The chamber fell silent. For the Serath, who had grown used to betrayal and cruelty, such words were like water in a desert. They looked at the humans not as conquerors, but as something far more dangerous and far more precious. Allies who fought not for glory, but for survival, for principle, for the unshakable belief that no cry for help should be ignored. Across the cities, Serath civilians mingled with human soldiers. Children followed them, wide-eyed, tugging at their heavy armor, asking endless questions. The soldiers laughed softly, giving rations, showing them small devices from Earth. Medics tended the wounded without hesitation, never asking for payment or praise. Engineers worked side by side with Serath builders to restore power, clean water, and comm lines. For the first time since the invasion began, life returned to the streets, and everywhere the whispers grew. Deathworlders. At first the word was spoken with awe, almost with fear, but soon it became a promise, a comfort. If the Deathworlders stood with them, then the Serath were not doomed. They could rebuild. In the skies above, the united Earth fleet began preparations for the future. Human commanders knew the Empire would not forget this humiliation. They would come back with more ships with greater fury. But humanity was ready. They had no illusions of peace. Their history had been one long war against their own world, against one another, against nature itself. And every battle had shaped them into survivors, into warriors who refused to fall. Word of the battle spread faster than light across the galaxy. Traitors, smugglers, and spies carried tales of a new power, a species from a death world who had defeated the Empire in open battle. Entire systems trembled at the rumor. Some whispered that a new terror had risen, while others dared to hope that a true defender had arrived at last. In hidden chambers, Empire leaders raged. Their arrogance had been wounded, their supremacy challenged. To be defeated by a species no one had even counted as significant, it was unthinkable. They swore vengeance, but beneath their fury was fear. For if these humans could shatter one fleet, what else could they do? On Serath, the people gathered in a broken square where once their capital had stood proud. Human soldiers stood among them, watching quietly as the Serath raised a new banner, not of surrender, not of despair, but of alliance. The elder counselor spoke loudly, her voice carrying to every corner. We were dying and they came. We were lost and they answered. From this day we are not only Serath, we are allies of Earth. The crowd erupted, voices joining as one. For the first time in memory, their chants were not of fear but of strength. Earth! 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 Children lifted small flags with the strange blue-green symbol of the human planet. Families wept, not from grief but from hope. Admiral Hale stood in the crowd, his expression unchanged, his voice quiet as he spoke to his officers. This is only the first step. The galaxy will test us, but let them come. We are ready. And so it was written in the stars. Humanity had entered the stage of galactic history, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as something far more unsettling, as the species who would always answer. The Serath would rebuild.